The furnace breath hit Leo Townsend's face at 5:47 a.m., same as it had every morning for 26 years. He breathed it in deep, the sulfur and heat, and felt real. Most mornings he'd pause like this, just for a moment, at the threshold of Norton Company's grinding wheel division, letting the warmth seep into his bones before the December cold could follow him inside. Worcester's winters had a way of settling into a man's joints, especially at 52. Inside, the foundry floor hummed with the steady rhythm that had defined Leo's adult life. Molten abrasive material glowed orange as it poured into molds, the sound of machinery a constant reassurance. Men moved in practiced patterns, their movements efficient from years of repetition. Leo clocked in and nodded to Ray Gonzalez, who'd started the same week as him back in 1950. "Cold enough for ya?" Ray called over the din. Leo grunted acknowledgement. Words weren't necessary after all these years. He hung his coat in his locker, donned his safety gear, and took his position at the furnace controls. His hands knew the work before his mind had fully awakened, checking gauges, adjusting valves, monitoring the temperature of the silicon carbide mix that would become industrial grinding wheels shipped across the country. Norton made the best abrasives in the nation, everyone knew that. The company had been Worcester's backbone since before the Civil War. The familiar weight of responsibility settled onto Leo's shoulders as the day shift came fully alive around him. From his station he could see most of the vast floor men moving like cells in a living organism. The foundry breathed and pulsed. When he'd started here, fresh out of high school with his father's recommendations smoothing the way, Leo had been overwhelmed by the scale of it all. Now the massive space felt like an extension of his own body. At 9:30, Leo took his break, unwrapping the sandwich Rose had packed. 28 years of marriage, and she still wrote little notes on the wax paper. Today's read, "Don't forget Tommy's basketball game tonight, 7 p.m. He smiled, folded the paper, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Tommy was their youngest, a senior in high school with a decent jump shot. College material, the coach said, unlike Leo's older two sons who'd followed him onto the foundry floor after graduation. Meeting in the lunchroom at end of shift, Ray said, dropping onto the bench beside him. Mandatory. Leo frowned. What for? Dunno, management stuff. Ray shrugged, but something in his expression made Leo uneasy. The rest of the shift passed with the comforting predictability that had structured Leo's life since he was 26. The temperature outside dropped. He could feel it in the changing air currents near the loading dock. But inside, the foundry remained constant, hot, alive with purpose. At 2:45, 15 minutes before the end of shift, the men began gathering in the cafeteria. Leo found a spot against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. He'd never liked these gatherings, usually meant some new safety protocol or production quota. The room filled quickly, the men unusually quiet. Harold Winthrop, the plant manager, entered with two men in suits Leo didn't recognize. Winthrop's face was gray, like he'd been dusted with the same abrasive powder they manufactured. "I'll get straight to the point," Winthrop said, his voice echoing in the uncharacteristic silence. "As you all know, Norton was acquired by Dresser Industries last year. The transition team has completed their evaluation of all divisions, and effective March 1st, the grinding wheel division will be closing operations in Worcester." The words hung in the air like smoke. Leo felt his heart stutter in his chest, certain he'd misheard. The decision comes after months of evaluation. Foreign competition, especially from Germany and increasingly Japan, has made our production costs unsustainable. The company will be consolidating operations at newer facilities in the South and Mexico. Someone shouted a question about transfers. Another voice demanded to know about pensions. Leo couldn't process the words. His gaze fixed on the factory floor visible through the cafeteria windows, the furnaces, the conveyor belts, the machines that had been more constant in his life than anything except Rose. "Severance packages will be based on years of service," Winthrop was saying. "Human resources will meet with each of you individually next week. Some positions may be available at other Norton facilities, but relocation would be at your own expense." March 1st. Barely 2 months away, Leo felt someone grip his arm and realized his knees had buckled slightly. It was Larry Markham, 20 years on the floor. "You okay, Leo?" He nodded mechanically. Around him, men were shouting now, anger replacing shock. But Leo felt strangely hollow, like one of the ceramic molds after the material had been poured out. "Meeting with union reps tomorrow morning," Larry was saying. "They can't just do this, right? We've got contracts." But Leo knew, with a certainty that settled in his stomach like lead, that they could, and they had. He walked back to his locker in a daze, his body moving through the motions while his mind refused to process what he'd just heard. 26 years, he'd started on this floor the week after his wedding to Rose. They'd bought their house on Grafton Hill with the certainty of Norton employment backing the mortgage. They'd raised 3 children on his Norton paycheck, with the Norton medical plan covering Tommy's broken arm and Lisa's appendectomy. He'd planned to retire from Norton in 13 more years, just like his father had. The drive home felt surreal. Worcester in December was already dark at 3:30, the streets wet with melting snow, Christmas decorations hanging from lampposts downtown. Leo drove past the other factories and mills that had defined the city's skyline and identity for generations: Wyman Gordon Forgings, American Steel and Wire, Reed and Prince Manufacturing. Worcester had always been a city that made things, real things you could hold in your hands. The Townsend house on Barclay Street was a modest 2-story with aluminum siding Leo had installed himself 10 summers ago. The Christmas tree was visible through the front window, colored lights blinking in the early darkness. Rose's car wasn't in the driveway, she'd be at her part-time job at the hospital billing office until 5. Leo sat in his car for long minutes, engine off, watching his breath cloud in the cold. How would he tell her? What would he say to his sons who worked at the same plant? Larry had been right to grab his arm. His knees felt weak again just sitting there. Finally, the cold forced him inside. The house was warm, the kitchen smelling of something Rose had left in the slow cooker, a pot roast, he guessed. He hung his coat and sat heavily at the kitchen table, not bothering to turn on more than the light above the stove. This was not how it was supposed to go. A man gave his loyalty to a company, and the company gave security in return. That was the deal, that was what his father had taught him, what America promised. You worked hard, you provided, you belonged somewhere. Leo stared at his hands. They were workers' hands, thick-fingered, calloused, with a small burn scar on the right palm from his 3rd year on the job. His hands knew how to build, how to make things that lasted. What good were they in a city whose factories were dying one by one? Rose found him still sitting there an hour later, the kitchen dark except for that single light. Leo. Why are you sitting in the dark? She flipped the overhead light and stopped short when she saw his face. What's wrong? Is it one of the kids? He looked up at her, this woman who'd stood beside him for nearly 3 decades, and felt his throat close up. Rose Valerio had been 18 when they'd married, her dark hair and laughing eyes the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The decades had added silver to her hair and lines around those eyes, but she was still his Rose, still the one constant he could count on. Norton's closing the grinding wheel division, he said, the words strange in his mouth. March 1st. Rose set her purse down slowly. The whole division, are they transferring you? To Mexico? Leo's laugh had no humor in it. They're offering some positions down south, but we'd have to pay to move, and no guarantees how long those plants will last either. She sat across from him, reaching for his hands. Her fingers were warm against his skin. We'll figure it out, she said. You've got skills, Leo, and seniority, maybe one of the other plants in town. What other plants, Rose? Wyman Gordon laid off 300 last month. American Steel and Wire's down to a skeleton crew. Reed and Prince is talking about moving to China. He pulled his hands away, immediately regretting the gesture when he saw the hurt flash across her face. I'm 52 years old. Who's going to hire me? The plant's not closing tomorrow, she said, her voice gentle but firm. We have time to think, to plan. We've been through hard times before. But they hadn't, not really, not like this. There had been layoffs over the years, temporary furloughs, wage freezes, but the foundry had always been there, the rhythm of shifts marking the calendar of their lives. Tommy's game is tonight, Rose reminded him. Let's not say anything to the kids yet, okay? Not until we know more about the severance, about what options we have. Leo nodded, though the thought of sitting through a basketball game pretending nothing had changed seemed impossible. But Rose was right, there was no sense worrying the kids until they had a plan. Tommy's game passed in a blur. Leo sat in the bleachers beside Rose, clapping automatically when the crowd clapped, standing when they stood. His oldest son, Larry Jr., was there with his wife and their toddler. His middle son, Michael, arrived late, still in his Norton work clothes, having come straight from second shift. The sight of the Norton logo on Michael's jacket made Leo's chest ache. At home that night, after the kids had left and Tommy had gone to bed, Leo sat at the kitchen table with Rose, a beer in front of him. I've been thinking, she said cautiously. I could see about going full-time at the hospital. They've been asking me to for a while now. The suggestion stung more than Leo wanted to admit. You think my wife's paycheck is going to keep this family afloat? I think we need to consider all our options, Leo. Pride doesn't pay the mortgage. He knew she was right, but something in him rebelled at the thought. He'd never once failed to provide for his family. The idea of depending on Rose's income felt like a fundamental reshuffling of the world's proper order. I'll find something, he said firmly. Don't worry about it. But as he lay awake that night, listening to Rose's steady breathing beside him, Leo couldn't stop the parade of worries. The mortgage had 10 years left. Tommy would start college next fall. The car needed a new transmission. And beneath the practical concerns lay something deeper, a question he'd never had to ask before. Who was Leo Townsend without the foundry? The next morning, Leo joined 200 Norton workers at the Union Hall. The place was packed, men standing along the walls, the air thick with cigarette smoke and fear poorly disguised as anger. Union representatives outlined what they knew, which wasn't much more than what Winthrop had told them. Yes, the closure was legal under the current contract. Yes, they would fight for the best severance packages possible. No, there wasn't much chance of stopping the shutdown. This is happening all over, said Jim Russo, the union president. Not just Norton, not just Worcester. All across the country, companies are moving production overseas or down to the Sun Belt. It's cheaper labor, fewer regulations. So what are we supposed to do? Someone shouted from the back. Just roll over and take it. We're going to negotiate the best deal we can, Russo replied. But I won't stand here and give you false hope. The decision's been made at levels way above anything we can influence. Leo sat with Ray and a few other men from their shift, listening as the discussion grew heated. Talk of strikes, of lawsuits, of protests. But beneath the anger, he sensed the same hollow feeling that had settled in his own chest, the recognition that the world was changing in ways they couldn't control. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall. Leo declined an invitation to grab a beer with Ray and some others. Instead, he drove slowly through the streets of Worcester, past the three-deckers of the old immigrant neighborhoods, past the grand homes on Salisbury Street, past the colleges on the hills. This city had raised him, shaped him. His grandfather had come here from Ireland in 1893 to work in the wire factories. His father had spent 40 years at Norton. The Townsends were Worcester people, factory people. It was who they were. Almost without planning to, Leo found himself driving to the Norton complex. He parked across the street and watched the afternoon shift arriving, men walking through the same doors he'd entered yesterday morning in another lifetime. A tap on his window startled him. It was Michael, his middle son, bundled against the cold, concern on his face. Leo rolled down the window. Dad, what are you doing here? You're not on till tomorrow, right? Leo forced a smile, just had some paperwork to drop off, heading in. Michael nodded, yeah, running late. Listen, there's all kinds of rumors flying around. Guys saying the division's closing. That's not true, is it? The lie rose automatically to Leo's lips, a father's instinct to protect his son. But Michael was 24 with a wife and a baby on the way. He deserved the truth. They announced it yesterday, Leo said quietly, March 1st. Michael's face drained of color, but that's just a couple months. What are we going to do? We'll figure something out, Leo said, echoing Rose's words from yesterday. Don't worry about it today, go on, don't be late. He watched his son walk toward the factory, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. Leo had gotten Michael the job at Norton 3 years ago, pulling strings with the floor supervisor. He'd been so proud that day, another Townsend man making his way in the world, continuing the family tradition. Now he felt only guilt. The next week passed in a fog of meetings and paperwork. Leo met with HR about his severance package, 26 weeks of pay, health insurance for 3 months, pension benefits he could access early with penalties or wait until retirement age. It was better than many would get, thanks to his years of service, but spread over the years until he could reasonably find another job if he could find one at all. At home, Rose had begun cutting expenses. No more morning coffee at the diner before her shift. No new clothes for now. They'd need to talk to Tommy about choosing a state college instead of the private schools he'd been considering. The night Leo had dreaded came when Larry Jr. and Michael both came for dinner, their wives and children in tow. Rose had made Leo's favorite pot roast, the house warm and noisy with family. But beneath the normal chatter ran an undercurrent of tension. They all knew why they'd been summoned. After dinner, with the women clearing dishes and the children playing in the living room, Leo sat his sons down in the den. The room was small, wood-paneled, with his recliner and a small TV where they watched Red Sox games together. "You both know about Norton," he began. "I wanted us to talk, figure out what's next." Larry Jr., at 27 the oldest and most like Leo in temperament, leaned forward. "I've been asking around. Wyman Gordon's not hiring, but I heard Follow might be adding a shift in the spring." Follow Wire and Cable, another Worcester institution though smaller than Norton, less stable. Michael shook his head. "The problem isn't just Norton, it's everywhere. Paul Desrosiers's brother works at American Steel. They're talking about another round of layoffs in February." "There's places outside Worcester," Leo said, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. The Townsends had been in Worcester for 3 generations. Springfield, maybe, Hartford. "Move?" Larry looked scandalized. "Dad, my whole life is here. Sarah's family, the house we just bought." "I'm just saying we need to consider all options," Leo cut in. "Your families have to eat." "What about you?" Michael asked. "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air. Leo had been asking himself the same thing for a week with no answer. "I've got severance," he said, "some savings." "I'll find something." His sons exchanged a look he couldn't quite interpret, concern, maybe, or something that made him even more uncomfortable. Doubt. Later, after everyone had gone home with promises to keep each other informed of any job leads, Leo sat alone in the den. The house was quiet, Rose already in bed, Tommy staying overnight at a friend's. On the shelf above the TV sat the things Leo treasured: his father's pocket watch, a baseball signed by Carl Yastazemski, a small bronze plaque from Norton commemorating 20 years of service. His life contained in a few objects, a life built around certainties that were no longer certain. January brought more news, none of it good. U.S. Steel announced layoffs. Johnson Steel and Wire was cutting production. The recession that had gripped the country since 1981 showed no signs of easing, especially in manufacturing cities like Worcester. Each morning's Worcester Telegram brought fresh announcements of closures, layoffs, companies relocating south or overseas. Leo continued going to work each day, though the atmosphere at Norton had changed. Men moved more slowly, talked less. The looming closure hung over them all, a countdown everyone felt but no one mentioned. Some had already found other jobs and left. Others, like Leo, worked in a kind of suspended animation, going through the motions while wondering what came next. At home, Rose had indeed increased her hours at the hospital, now working full-time in the billing department. She came home tired but determined, bringing home want ads she'd circled, ideas she'd heard from coworkers. "The hospital's always hiring orderlies," she suggested one night. Leo looked at her incredulously. "You want me to empty bedpans?" "I want you to keep a roof over our heads," she shot back. "And maybe consider that honest work is honest work, no matter what it is." He'd apologized, but the idea remained unthinkable. He was a skilled furnace operator, a man who made things. The thought of working in a hospital, or behind a counter at a store, or any of the other service jobs that seemed to be the only ones available, it wasn't just about the lower pay. It was about who he was, who he had always been. February arrived with bitter cold and mounting tension. At Norton, equipment was already being packed for shipment to other facilities. Each day, another corner of the vast floor fell silent. Leo's section would be among the last to close, the foundry operations needed until the final week. At the Union Hall, talk had turned ugly. There was talk of sabotage, of making sure the equipment never made it to Mexico in working order. Leo stayed away from those conversations. Whatever happened, he wouldn't destroy what had given him a living for 26 years. He owed the machines more respect than that, even if the company had shown none to its workers. One evening in mid-February, Leo came home to find a strange car in the driveway. Inside, Rose sat at the kitchen table with a man in a suit who introduced himself as Richard Kelly from Follow Wire and Cable. "Mr. Kelly is the personnel manager," Rose explained, her eyes bright with an excitement Leo hadn't seen in weeks. "I ran into his wife at the hospital today. She's a nurse in pediatrics. When I mentioned your situation, she suggested he stop by." Leo shook the man's hand automatically, though confusion and something like anger flared in his chest. Rose had gone behind his back, had taken it upon herself to find him work like he was some helpless child. "Mr. Townsend, I understand you've been with Norton for quite some time," Kelly said. "We have a potential opening in our quality control department. Not exactly the same as what you've been doing, but given your experience with manufacturing processes." "I appreciate you coming by," Leo interrupted, but I should tell you I've got several opportunities I'm exploring right now. The lie came easily, pride overriding everything else. Rose's face fell. Leo. In fact, I was just about to call about one of them, he continued, avoiding her eyes. If you'll excuse me. He retreated to the den, hearing Rose making apologetic noises to Kelly. Shame and anger warred in his chest, both directed at himself but spilling onto Rose, onto the stranger who'd seen him at his most vulnerable. When the front door closed, Rose appeared in the doorway of the den, her expression a mixture of hurt and fury. How could you? She demanded. Do you know how hard it was for me to ask for help, to admit to Sheila Kelly that my husband was about to lose his job? I didn't ask you to beg for me, Leo shot back. I can find my own damn job. Really? Where? Show me these opportunities you're exploring. Show me a single application you've filled out. Her voice rose. It's been 6 weeks, Leo, and you've done nothing but feel sorry for yourself. March 1st is 2 weeks away. What are you waiting for? A miracle? I'm waiting to be treated with some respect, the words exploded out of him. By Norton, by this city, by my own wife, I've worked hard my entire life. I've never asked for handouts. I've never failed to provide for this family. And now you're going behind my back, making me look like some charity case. Is that what this is about, your pride? Rose's voice dropped dangerously low. Well, you listen to me, Leo Townsend. I didn't marry your job at Norton, I married you. And I expected the man I married to care more about his family's future than about his ego. She turned and walked away, leaving Leo standing in the den, his reflection visible in the dark TV screen. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, gray at the temples, lines etched deep around his mouth, eyes haunted with a fear he couldn't name. That night, Leo slept on the couch, pride keeping him from apologizing, though he knew Rose was right. The next morning she left for work without waking him. He went to his shift at Norton, moving through the increasingly empty factory like a ghost. During lunch break, Leo found himself sitting alone. Ray had taken a job at a warehouse in Framingham, commuting an hour each way but grateful for the work. Others had scattered to whatever jobs they could find or had given up coming to the near-empty plant during the final weeks. He unwrapped his sandwich mechanically, no note today on the wax paper, Rose's silent rebuke cut deeper than any words could have. Mr. Townsend. Leo looked up to see a young man in a Norton security uniform. Yeah. There's a call for you at the office, something about your son. Leo's heart lurched. He abandoned his lunch and followed the guard, scenarios flashing through his mind. Tommy in a car accident. Michael hurt on the second shift. Larry Jr.'s little girl sick, but when he reached the office and took the phone, it was Larry Jr.'s voice, thick with emotion but unharmed. Dad, I'm at the hospital with Michael. Sarah just called me. There was an accident on the floor, some equipment they were moving. His hand, Dad, it's bad. The world tilted. Leo gripped the desk. How bad? They don't know if he'll keep the fingers. They're prepping him for surgery now. Mom's already here. She was working when they brought him in. I'm coming, Leo said, already moving. Tell him I'm coming right now. The drive to Worcester City Hospital took 9 minutes. Leo didn't remember a single turn, a single stoplight. All he could think was that Michael, his quiet, steady middle child, was hurt. Hurt at Norton, the place that had already taken so much from them. He found Rose in the surgical waiting room, her face pale but composed, still wearing her hospital ID badge. Larry Jr. paced nearby, his expression grim. What happened? Leo demanded. How bad is it? They were moving one of the grinding machines, Larry Jr. explained. The brace slipped. His right hand was caught between the machine and a support beam. 3 fingers were crushed. Rose took Leo's hand. Whatever anger had been between them last night was gone, burned away by the immediate crisis. The orthopedic surgeon is good, Leo, Dr. Parker. If anyone can save the function of his hand, she can. Leo sank into a chair, suddenly boneless. His right hand. His dominant hand, the hand Michael used to write to work to hold his new baby daughter. They said it could have been worse, Rose said softly, if the machine had shifted a few inches more. They didn't finish the thought. Instead, they sat together in the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting room, the 3 of them bound by worry and love and the terrible knowledge that life could change in an instant, without warning or fairness. 3 hours later, Dr. Parker emerged in surgical scrubs, her face tired but satisfied. The surgery went well. We were able to repair much of the damage, though there was extensive crushing of the bones in his index and middle fingers. He'll need more surgeries, rehabilitation, but I believe he'll regain partial function of the hand. Partial, Leo repeated the word hollow. Given the extent of the injury, that's actually very good news, doctor. Parker said gently, he's young, he'll heal better than someone older, and there are many occupational paths open to someone with his condition. Not at Norton's, Leo thought bitterly. Not in any of Worcester's factories where two good hands were the basic requirement for employment, not that it mattered now, with Norton closing in 2 weeks. They were allowed to see Michael briefly in recovery. He was groggy from anesthesia, his right hand wrapped in thick bandages, but his eyes found Leo's. "Dad," he mumbled, "the baby, how will I hold her now?" Leo felt his throat close up. He gripped his son's uninjured left hand. "You'll hold her just fine, son, don't you worry about that, you focus on getting better." Later in the hospital cafeteria, Leo sat with Rose and Larry Jr., over untouched cups of coffee. Michael's wife Donna had arrived with the baby, and they were now sitting with him in his room. "Norton will cover the medical costs," Leo said. "At least there's that, but after March 1st. "He's on my insurance," Larry Jr. said quietly. "I added him and Donna last week when I got the job at Follow." Leo looked up sharply. "You got a job at Follow, when were you going to tell me?" Larry Jr. had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was going to, Dad. But after what happened with that guy who came to the house, I wasn't sure how you'd take it." A surge of shame washed through Leo. His own son had been afraid to tell him about a new job, worried about his father's pride. "Mr. Kelly," Rose said, "the man who came to the house, he's Larry's new boss." The pieces connected in Leo's mind. Rose hadn't been going behind his back to beg for charity. She'd been following up on a lead from their son, trying to help in the way families were supposed to help each other. "It's a good job," Larry Jr. said, almost defensively. "Quality control supervisor. Less pay than Norton but stable, and they're expanding, not contracting." "I'm proud of you," Leo said, meaning it. "That's good work, important work." Larry Jr. looked relieved, then concerned again. "But what about you, Dad? Have you?" "No," Leo admitted. "I haven't looked, not really." The admission cost him, but after today, after seeing Michael's crushed hand, his own pride seemed a small and foolish thing. "I guess I've been waiting for Norton to somehow change its mind, for things to go back to how they were." Rose covered his hand with hers. "Leo, nothing's going back to how it was. Not for any of us." The truth of her words settled into him, heavy but clarifying. He'd been clinging to a world that was already gone, to an identity that had been defined by a single company, a single job. But that wasn't who he was, not really, not completely. He was Rose's husband, Larry, Michael, and Tommy's father. A man who knew how to work hard, who understood precision and quality, who had skills that went beyond the specific tasks he performed at Norton. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, looking at Rose, "for everything. For being so stubborn." She squeezed his hand. "We're all scared, Leo. It's okay to be scared, but we can't let fear stop us from moving forward." The next day, Leo returned to Norton for his shift, but something had changed within him. He looked at the factory not with the desperate attachment of the past weeks, but with a kind of clear-eyed acceptance. This chapter was ending, others would begin. During his lunch break, he used the payphone in the hallway to call Richard Kelly at Follow. The conversation was brief but productive. Yes, the quality control position was still open. Yes, they could meet tomorrow to discuss it. No, it wasn't charity. Norton employees were known for their skill and work ethic, and Follow would be lucky to have him. When he hung up, Leo felt lighter than he had in weeks. Not happy exactly, but purposeful, moving forward, as Rose had said. That evening he sat with Tommy at the kitchen table, college brochures spread between them. They'd already agreed that Worcester State was the most sensible choice financially, though Tommy had been accepted to Boston College as well. "I've been thinking," Leo said, "maybe we can make BC work after all." Tommy looked up, surprised. "But what about the money, with Norton closing?" "I've got some leads on new jobs," Leo said, surprising himself with his optimism. "And your mother's gone full-time at the hospital. Between that and your scholarship, we might be able to swing it." Tommy's face lit up, then dimmed again with concern. "But what about what you always said, about staying close to home, about family sticking together?" Leo thought about Worcester, the only home he'd ever known, the city his family had helped build for 3 generations. He thought about the factories closing one by one, the skills and traditions being lost, the uncertainty of the future. Sometimes, he said slowly, the best way to honor where you come from is to go somewhere new and carry it with you. Your grandfather came to Worcester because that's where the opportunity was. Maybe for your generation, the opportunity is somewhere else. Tommy nodded, his expression solemn beyond his 17 years. But you and Mom will stay here, right? This is our home, Leo said. We've weathered hard times before. Worcester's changing, but it's still Worcester. That night, Leo sat on the porch despite the February cold, looking out at Barclay Street with its neat row of houses, most occupied by families like his, working people who'd built lives around the factories and mills of Worcester. How many of them were facing the same uncertainties? How many were redefining themselves in the wake of closures and layoffs? Rose joined him, draping a blanket over both their shoulders. They sat in companionable silence, watching their breath fog in the cold air. I called Kelly, Leo finally said. I'm meeting him tomorrow about the job. Rose leaned against him. I'm glad. It'll be different. I've never done quality control. You've been doing quality control for 26 years, she corrected. Just not officially. How many times have you spotted a problem in a batch before it went out? How many times have you adjusted a machine to make sure it was perfect? Leo considered this. She was right in her way. The skills were transferable even if the specific task was new. Michael's going to need help, he said. Learning to work with his hand the way it is. He will, Rose agreed, and will be there for him, all of us. The image of his son's bandaged hand flashed in Leo's mind, followed by a surge of protective determination. Whatever happened, however Worcester changed, the Townsends would adapt. They would stay and work and find new ways to build a life in the city their ancestors had chosen. March 1st arrived cold and clear. Leo drove to the Norton plant for the last time, joining the handful of workers who had stayed until the very end. They moved through their final tasks quietly, each man lost in his own thoughts. At noon, they gathered in the cafeteria one last time. Winthrop made a short speech about Norton's legacy, about the company's gratitude for their service. The words rang hollow in the nearly empty room. Afterward, Leo walked the factory floor alone, saying goodbye to the machines and spaces that had structured his days for more than half his life. He paused at his station, running a hand over the control panel he'd operated for so many years. It would be dismantled tomorrow, shipped to Mexico where someone else would learn its rhythms and quirks. In his locker, Leo collected the few personal items he'd kept there, a Red Sox cap, a small photo of Rose and the kids, a battered thermos. 26 years packed away in moments. Outside, the winter sun was bright but gave little warmth. Leo stood in the parking lot, looking up at the Norton building with its red brick and tall windows. When his father had retired, there had been a party, handshakes, promises to stay in touch. Today, there was just the empty lot, a few remaining cars, the hollow feeling of something monumental ending not with celebration but with quiet defeat. Ray Gonzalez appeared beside him, hands deep in his coat pockets. So that's it, Ray said, 26 years. Leo nodded. You start in Framingham Monday. Yeah, our commute each way, but it's work. Ray squinted up at the building. You know what gets me. My old man used to say, learn a trade, Ray, work with your hands. They can't ship that overseas. Turns out they can ship the whole damn factory. Leo understood exactly what he meant. They'd been raised to believe in the permanence of places like Norton, in the security of making things America needed. That belief had shaped every choice, every assumption about how the world worked. I start at Follow next week, Leo said. Quality control. No kidding, Larry Jr.'s place. That's good, Leo, real good. They stood in silence for another moment, two men saying goodbye to more than just a job. You know, Ray said finally, my grandfather used to tell stories about when he first came to Worcester in 1910. Said you could walk from one end of the city to the other and never stop hearing the sound of machines. Looms, presses, furnaces. Said it was like the whole city was one big factory. Leo nodded. He'd heard similar stories from his own grandfather. I wonder what they'll say about Worcester 50 years from now, Ray continued. When there's no factories left, when it's all hospitals and colleges and whatever else, will they remember us at all, the men who made things? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Then Ray clapped Leo on the shoulder, said a gruff goodbye and walked to his car. Leo remained, watching as the last workers trickled out. Finally, alone in the parking lot, he got into his car and drove away from Norton Company for the last time. Instead of going straight home, Leo drove through Worcester, following a route that took him past all the factories and mills that had defined the city's identity for generations. American Steel and Wire, where his grandfather had worked. Wyman Gordon Forgings, where his uncle had spent 40 years. Reed and Prince Manufacturing, where so many of his neighbors had earned their living. Some were already closed, others diminished, all facing the same pressures that had doomed Norton's grinding wheel division. The city would survive. Worcester had weathered hard times before, but it would be different. The industrial age that had built these neighborhoods, that had drawn immigrants from Ireland and Italy and Poland and Quebec, was ending. Something new would take its place, but the transition would be painful, costly in ways that went beyond economics. At home, Rose was waiting. She'd taken the day off to be with him, understanding the significance of this final shift. Tommy was at school, but Larry Jr. and Michael had both come by. Michael's hand was still heavily bandaged, but he was in good spirits, talking about a vocational rehabilitation program the hospital had recommended. They had lunched together, the conversation carefully steered away from Norton, from the changes happening all around them. Only after Larry Jr. and Michael had left did Rose broach the subject. How was it, the last day? Leo considered the question, quiet, almost like any other day except for the emptiness. Most everyone already gone. Rose nodded, waiting for more. Leo struggled to find words for the complex emotions of the day. I kept thinking about my father, he finally said. About how certain everything seemed when I started at Norton. The path was so clear: work hard, provide for your family, retire with dignity. He never had to question it, never had to reinvent himself. Different times, Rose said softly. I'm not sure I know how to be anything other than a Norton man, Leo admitted. It's who I've been my whole adult life. Rose took his hand across the table. You're still the same man, Leo, still the one who taught Larry Jr. to catch a baseball, who sat up all night with Michael when he had scarlet fever, who helps Tommy with his math even though you claim to be terrible at it. Still, the one who remembers how I like my coffee and warms my side of the bed in winter. Her words washed over him, a reminder that his identity had never been solely about his job, however much it had felt that way. The job at Follow, he said, it's different work, office work mostly. Checking samples, keeping records. You'll learn, Rose said with confidence. You always do. That evening, Tommy came home from basketball practice to find Leo in the backyard, splitting wood for the fireplace. Despite the cold, Leo had worked up a sweat, the physical labor a release for the emotions of the day. Dad, Tommy approached cautiously, Mom said today was your last day. You okay? Leo set down the axe, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. I'm okay, Tommy, just needed to hit something, I guess. Tommy picked up a piece of split wood, examining it. Coach Sullivan says his dad used to work at Norton too. Says it's happening all over, factories closing, jobs going overseas. He's right, Leo said, world's changing. Is that why you said I should consider Boston College? Because there aren't going to be factory jobs anymore. The question surprised Leo with its directness. He looked at his youngest son, seeing the intelligence in his eyes, the awareness of the world shifting beneath their feet. Partly, Leo admitted, the kind of work I did that your brothers did, it's not going to be the same for your generation, but also because you've got opportunities I never had. Your mother and I want you to take them. Tommy nodded, thoughtful, but what about Worcester, if everyone with an education leaves? The question echoed Ray's from earlier, what would become of the city they knew? Leo had no perfect answer, but he found himself speaking with more hope than he'd felt in months. Worcester's been here almost 200 years, Tommy. It's changed before and it'll change again. Maybe the future isn't in grinding wheels and steel wire. Maybe it's in something we can't even imagine yet. But as long as there are people who care about this city, who build lives here and raise families here, it'll be Worcester. Tommy seemed satisfied with this answer. He helped Leo carry the split wood to the pile by the house, working alongside his father in companionable silence as the winter day faded into early darkness. That night, Leo dreamed of Norton, not as it had been in its final days, empty and echoing, but as he'd first seen it at 26, vast and humming with purpose. In the dream, he walked the factory floor with his father, both of them in their work clothes, though his father had been dead for 8 years. Things change, son, his father said in the dream, but the work remains, different work but still work. Still making something that matters. Leo woke before dawn, Rose sleeping peacefully beside him. The dream lingered, not quite fading as dreams usually did. He lay in the darkness, turning his father's words over in his mind. Different work, still making something that matters. Outside, Worcester was waking up. Soon, Rose would stir beside him. Tommy would grumble about getting up for school. Larry Jr. would head to follow for the early shift. Michael would go to physical therapy, learning to use his damaged hand. And Leo would face his first day in 26 years without Norton, without the identity that had defined him for so long. But not, he realized, without purpose, not without the ability to adapt, to learn, to continue. Norton was gone, but Worcester remained, changing still but enduring, and so would he. Leo Townsend got out of bed and began his new day. 25 years later, Leo stood in the renovated Norton Company complex, now converted into biotech offices and upscale loft apartments. The vast open space where he'd operated furnace controls for over 2 decades was now a sleek common area with exposed brick walls and high ceilings. Young professionals in casual business wear moved through the space, many wearing ID badges from the pharmaceutical research company that occupied 3 floors of the building. He ran his hand along a preserved section of original brick wall, feeling the texture beneath his fingertips. At 77, his hands were more gnarled now, joints swollen with arthritis, but they still remembered the feel of this place. The brick was the same even if everything else had changed. "Dad, you okay?" Tommy's voice brought him back to the present. His youngest son, now in his 40s, stood nearby, watching him with gentle concern. "Just remembering," Leo said. "My station was over there, where that conference room is now. Ran the number 4 furnace for 15 years before they moved me to supervision." Tommy nodded, patient. He'd heard these stories before, but he never rushed his father when memory took hold. They were here for the opening of the Worcester Industrial Heritage Museum, a project Tommy had helped develop through his position at the Worcester Historical Society. One wing of the old Norton complex had been dedicated to preserving the industrial history of the city, the tools, machines, photographs, and stories of the factories that had once defined Worcester. "They're ready for you whenever you are," Tommy said. "No rush." Leo took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and nodded. "Let's go." They walked together through the building, Tommy pointing out architectural features that had been preserved during renovation. In the museum wing, a small crowd had gathered, local dignitaries, former factory workers and their families, historians, journalists. Leo recognized many faces, though some had aged beyond easy identification. Ray Gonzalez was there, now stooped and thin but still sharp-eyed, his hand raised in greeting when he spotted Leo. At the front of the room stood Michael, Leo's middle son, now a successful physical therapist specializing in hand injuries. Despite the doctor's initial concerns, Michael had regained significant function in his damaged hand through years of determined rehabilitation. The experience had led him to a career helping others with similar injuries, turning what could have been a tragedy into a vocation. "Dad's here," Tommy announced as they approached the group. "We can begin." The small ceremony was simple but meaningful. The museum director spoke about Worcester's industrial heritage, about the generations of workers who had built the city's reputation for quality manufacturing. Michael, as the chair of the museum's Community Advisory Board, spoke about the importance of preserving these stories for future generations. "Worcester isn't just a place on a map," he said, his voice confident as he addressed the crowd. "It's a community shaped by work, by the things we made, the skills we developed, and the pride we took in building something that would last. This museum honors not just the machines and products, but the people whose hands and minds brought them into being." Then it was Leo's turn. He'd been asked to speak as one of the living links to Worcester's industrial past, a request that had both honored and terrified him. Public speaking had never been his strength. But as he looked out at the faces before him, former coworkers from Norton, colleagues from his later years at Follow, family members and neighbors who had weathered the same transitions he had, Leo found the words coming easily. "When Norton announced it was closing the grinding wheel division in 1983, I thought my world was ending," he began. "I'd been there 26 years. My father had worked there 40 years before me. I couldn't imagine Worcester without Norton or myself without that job." Heads nodded in understanding. So many had lived through similar experiences. "What I didn't understand then," Leo continued, "was that Worcester had always been changing. The wire factories that employed my grandfather gave way to the abrasives plants that employed my father and me. And when those closed, new industries came: biotech, healthcare, education. Different work, but still work that matters. He gestured to the exhibits around them. Photographs of factory floors now gone, tools and machines preserved like artifacts from another age, oral histories recorded from workers before their voices were lost. This museum isn't just about preserving the past, Leo said. It's about understanding how we got from there to here, how we adapted when the foundries shut down one by one. How we found new ways to be Worcester. After the ceremony, Leo walked through the exhibits with Rose beside him. At 75, her dark hair was now silver, but her eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had captured his heart as a young man. They paused before a large photograph of the Norton factory floor circa 1960, workers in their positions around the massive equipment. "There I am," Leo said, pointing to a younger version of himself, captured forever in black and white. "And that's Ray and Jim Kowalski and Hector Rivera." Rose squeezed his hand. "You all look so young." "We were," Leo agreed. "Just kids, really, thought it would last forever." They moved on to an exhibit about the factory closures of the 1980s, newspaper headlines preserved behind glass. Norton division to close, 600 jobs lost, Worcester manufacturing in decline, city faces uncertain future as factories shut down. Reading these headlines now from the perspective of decades later, Leo felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, pride in how they had survived, amazement at how completely the world had changed. "Grandpa," a small voice broke through his reverie. 6-year-old Sophia, Michael's granddaughter and Leo's great-granddaughter, came running up with the boundless energy of childhood. "Look what I found." She held up a small grinding wheel, one of the interactive exhibits designed for children to handle. "That's just like what we used to make," Leo told her, kneeling despite protesting knees. "These went all over the country, all over the world, helped build skyscrapers and bridges and airplanes." Sophia examined the object with newfound respect. "You made these?" "I helped," Leo said. "Lots of people worked together to make them. That's how factories worked. Everyone had a job to do, and all the jobs together made something important." The child nodded seriously, trying to understand a world so different from her own. "Can we make one together?" Leo smiled. "The factory's gone now, sweetheart, but there's a demonstration over there where they show how they were made." "Wanna see?" As they walked hand in hand toward the interactive display, Leo looked around at the transformed space. The old factory now housing a museum dedicated to preserving its memory, filled with people connecting across generations to understand how Worcester had changed and how it had endured. Norton was gone, American Steel and Wire was gone. Wyman Gordon was diminished to a fraction of its former size. The factories that had employed thousands, that had defined the city's identity for generations, existed now primarily in memory and in spaces like this one, preserved, honored, but no longer the economic engine of Worcester. But Worcester itself remained, adapted to a new economy, home to new industries and new families building their own connections to the city. And the Townsends remained as well: Leo and Rose, their children and grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, their lives taking paths Leo could never have imagined that dark day in 1983 when he'd driven away from Norton for the last time. Different work, but still work that matters. Different lives, but still lives connected to this place, to its history, to each other. As Sophia tugged him toward the grinding wheel demonstration, eager to understand this piece of her family's past, Leo felt a deep sense of completion. Not the end of a story, but the recognition of its continuity, its evolution into something new but still rooted in what had come before. Worcester had lost its foundries, but it had found a future, and so had he.